What up, good people? This is a thesis to please Jesus. Now, the main idea behind this thesis is that every human being, simply by the fact that you exist, is a unique expression of what the universe is. There's a connection between what the universe does and what a person can do. And the utility of the universe writ large is also the utility of a human being. And part of this utility is our consciousness and understanding what that consciousness is and understanding what understanding is. Understanding is a lot different than calculation or planning or prediction or modeling. Understanding is a genuine mathematical process, a genuine mathematical force, a genuine universal entropy, if you will. So without further ado, I'm going to start this with this clip of Sir Roger Penrose explaining exactly what mathematical understanding is, and we'll get on to consciousness from there. Thank you.
The statement here is that the perception of mathematical truth cannot be reduced to a set of mechanical rules. And this comes from a famous theorem due to Gödel, and Turing was certainly very familiar with this. It featured very much in his 1936 paper, the original one, because he was very much concerned with things that computers couldn't do, if you like. That was part of what he was trying to do. And so as to say what you couldn't do by a mechanical procedure, he had to define what he meant by a mechanical procedure and then show that there were certain things that you can't do with a mechanical procedure. Well, I'm going to phrase Gödel's theorem in a way which it's not normally phrased, but it is a perfectly correct deduction from his theorem. Tells us that for any mathematical theorem, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here with natural numbers and so on, it tells us for any set of mechanical theorem-proving rules, and when I say mechanical theorem-proving rules, I mean you have a set of procedures which can be checked by a computer. That's the crucial point. If you follow these rules and you come to a conclusion that it proves some mathematical statement of the kind we're talking about, then that alleged proof can be checked by a computer. So that's the kind of rules we're talking about. Then what you can construct is a particular mathematical statement, which Gödel shows you how to do, and I'm calling that G of R, which if we trust the rules, if we believe in the validity of the rules, that is to say, if we believe that anything we derive using the rules must be true, if you trust the rules, then you must also believe that this particular statement, G of R, is true. Yet, it cannot be proved using the rules. Now that's a very striking, remarkable thing, because what it's telling us is that whatever these rules are, if they're rules whose consequences we believe in, then that belief or that trust extends beyond the rules themselves. And you have to know that the rules are trustworthy, and that belief that they're trustworthy enables you to extend beyond the rules, so that this particular statement, G of R, cannot be proved using the rules of R, but the way in which it's constructed tells you that must nevertheless believe it's true. See, people usually state Gödel's theorem in a rather negative way. They say there are certain things you can't prove. But what they mean is you can't prove using a very specific set of rules. But if you trust those rules, then you can see that statement is true. And this is a very striking thing about the Gödel statement. And clearly Turing was very much aware of this.
Okay, so that was pretty amazing. I think some of the key concepts there was, if you accept the rules, circumstances in front of you, you'll be able to see how to go beyond it. And this is a fundamental process in the nature of human understanding, that which is beyond calculation or computer's ability to even grasp or to be able to validate as true even. So in the description of these rules, statements that can be proven or checked by someone else or another computer or another entity, what he's describing there, he's not only describing a type of mathematical calculation, but he's also describing how we normally think of as the scientific method. The scientific method is you start with a statement, and then this statement, included with this statement is a set of procedures that you should be able to proceed with and check the validity of that statement itself. So this type of proven things, this type of scientific understanding is calculation in mathematics, which we've seen is only a small part of the picture. And no matter what calculation you have, you can always go beyond it. So scientific understanding is not unuseful. That'd be the same thing as saying computers are unuseful. But it's not the end of the story. There's a lot more. Understanding is accepting what's in front of you and being able to go beyond that. And so Penrose here in this next clip starts to describe a little bit about how mathematical understanding is connected to intelligence and awareness. And we'll move on with that.
That's certain. So I can't see how this very sophisticated, very precise, unknown, unknowable algorithm can have come about through natural selection. So I leave you with that challenge. And it seems to me it's a big challenge. So what's been going on then? What was selected for if it was not a complicated, unknowable algorithm for doing things, arithmetical problems, which I can't believe? What it was, I think, is consciousness. You see, I would argue that consciousness, well, you see, it has many manifestations. Passive things, qualia, perception of the color red, or appreciation of a melody, or so forth, or active, free will, all these things. All sorts of words here which have to do with consciousness in one way or another: pain, love, red, pride, determination, intelligence, disgust, etc., etc. I want to concentrate on one word, that's understanding, and also only understanding in a very specific context, namely the one which you use to derive the validity of G of R and the fact that it can't be derived from R. In fact, I'm going to give you this argument later on, so wait for it. That's the hardest part of what I'm going to say, but I'll give you the argument. So it's not something which is that difficult. I'll give it in outline. And the basic point is understanding of what you're doing. And you can't, it seems to me, formalize understanding in terms of a purely computational system. And here is I say, is a computer-controlled robot capable of genuine understanding? Well, this sort of question has come up here. And whether you could test for understanding is one question, and that relates to the Turing test. Say, can you ask your computer or person, whichever it is, a question which requires understanding in the response, and that's the sort of thing that computers tend to lack. In fact, you see, I would say that how do we use computers in most things? If you want to solve some or simulate some problem about how stars behave or something, and you have a calculation you want to perform to see what it's going to do. Well, you supply the understanding, the computer does the calculation. It's a symbiotic relation we have with computers. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But it does seem to me, okay, the answer that the computer produces, it hasn't the remotest idea what it is, what it's for. You have to supply the understanding. So it seems to me the understanding is what the computer doesn't have. And now I've had three words here. I'm not going to define understanding. I don't know how to define understanding. The three other words I don't know how to define either. Intelligence is one of them, and awareness is another. All I'm saying is that they seem to depend, at least intelligence, whatever it is, I would think depends on understanding, because I wouldn't like to say of an entity that it is intelligent if it doesn't possess understanding. That certainly seems to me a natural use of words. Likewise, I would hesitate to say that an entity possesses understanding if it does not possess awareness. So it is related to this consciousness issue. Awareness is an aspect of consciousness, so it seems to me so is understanding. This doesn't say that computers couldn't have it. It's just saying that they're interrelated in this kind of way. So if understanding can be shown to be beyond computation, and that's the sort of argument I've just been trying to present you with, then intelligence is not a matter of computation. Moreover, certain aspects of awareness, and perhaps all are beyond computation also. So that's my position here, is that these things are beyond computation. Now I want to get slightly more technical, and I hope you'll bear with me here.
Okay, so what we have here is the idea that the universe itself is moving towards selecting for consciousness and the richness of consciousness to be expanded, and the idea that consciousness understanding is not something that you can necessarily calculate. And the idea is that this type of understanding is related to intelligence, and intelligence is related to awareness. So we have these three key words: understanding, intelligence, and awareness. Now Penrose talks about how he doesn't really have a definition for these words, other than the fact that he's presenting you with the argument that understanding is beyond calculation, therefore it seems like intelligence and awareness should be as well, and that these three things are related. Now where we're going to continue on is we're going to look at how intelligence is a genuine force in the universe, and so is awareness, and how these three things are come to a culmination, a pinnacle in the human individual experience. So what we've done here is we've laid out a basic guideline for what we mean by understanding. Understanding is something that's beyond the rules, beyond calculations. And it's something that human beings possess that just simple calculation cannot model. So now we're going to move on to what intelligence is, and what the force of intelligence is, and how that works in the universe, and continue on to awareness from there. Thank you.
Given this one equation, it's natural to ask, so what can you do with this? How predictive is it? Does it predict human-level intelligence? Does it predict artificial intelligence? So I'm going to show you now a video that will, I think, demonstrate some of the amazing applications of just this single equation.
Recent research in cosmology has suggested that universes that produce more disorder, or entropy, over their lifetimes should tend to have more favorable conditions for the existence of intelligent beings such as ourselves. But what if that tentative cosmological connection between entropy and intelligence hints at a deeper relationship? What if intelligent behavior doesn't just correlate with the production of long-term entropy, but actually emerges directly from it? To find out, we developed a software engine called Entropica, designed to maximize the production of long-term entropy of any system that it finds itself in. Amazingly, Entropica was able to pass multiple animal intelligence tests, play human games, and even earn money trading stocks, all without being instructed to do so. Here are some examples of Entropica in action. Just like a human standing upright without falling over, here we see Entropica automatically balancing a pole using a cart. This behavior is remarkable in part because we never gave Entropica a goal. It simply decided on its own to balance the pole. This balancing ability will have applications for humanoid robotics and human assistive technologies. Just as some animals can use objects in their environments as tools to reach into narrow spaces, here we see that Entropica, again, on its own initiative, was able to move a large disk representing an animal around so as to cause a small disk, representing a tool, to reach into a confined space holding a third disk and release the third disk from its initially fixed position. This tool use ability will have applications for smart manufacturing and agriculture. In addition, just as some other animals are able to cooperate by pulling opposite ends of a rope at the same time to release food, here we see that Entropica is able to accomplish a model version of that task. This cooperative ability has interesting implications for economic planning and a variety of other fields. Entropica is broadly applicable to a variety of domains. For example, here we see it successfully playing a game of Pong against itself, illustrating its potential for gaming. Here we see Entropica orchestrating new connections on a social network where friends are constantly falling out of touch and successfully keeping the network well connected. This same network orchestration ability also has applications in healthcare, energy, and intelligence. Here we see Entropica directing the paths of a fleet of ships, successfully discovering and utilizing the Panama Canal to globally extend its reach from the Atlantic to the Pacific. By the same token, Entropica is broadly applicable to problems in autonomous defense, logistics, and transportation. Finally, here we see Entropica spontaneously discovering and executing a buy low, sell high strategy on a simulated range-traded stock, successfully growing assets under management exponentially. This risk management ability will have broad applications in finance and insurance.
So what you've just seen is that a variety of signature human intelligent cognitive behaviors, such as tool use and walking upright and social cooperation, all follow from a single equation which drives a system to maximize its future freedom of action. Now, there's a profound irony here. Going back to the beginning of the usage of the term robot, the play R-U-R, there was always a concept that if we developed machine intelligence, there would be a cybernetic revolt. The machines would rise up against us. One major consequence of this work is that maybe all of these decades we've had the whole concept of cybernetic revolt in reverse. It's not that machines first become intelligent and then megalomaniacal and try to take over the world. It's quite the opposite, that the urge to take control of all possible futures is a more fundamental principle than that of intelligence, that general intelligence may in fact emerge directly from this sort of control grabbing, rather than vice versa. Another important consequence is goal seeking. I'm often asked, how does the ability to seek goals follow from this sort of framework? And the answer is, the ability to seek goals will follow directly from this in the following sense. Just like you would travel through a tunnel, a bottleneck in your future path space in order to achieve many other diverse objectives later on, or just like you would invest in a financial security, reducing your short-term liquidity in order to increase your wealth over the long term, goal seeking emerges directly from a long-term drive to increase future freedom of action. Finally, Richard Feynman, famous physicist, once wrote that if human civilization were destroyed and you could pass only a single concept on to our descendants to help them rebuild civilization, that concept should be that all matter around us is made out of tiny elements that attract each other when they're far apart, but repel each other when they're close together. My equivalent of that statement to pass on to descendants to help them build artificial intelligences or to help them understand human intelligence is the following. Intelligence should be viewed as a physical process that tries to maximize future freedom of action and avoid constraints in its own future. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was amazing. I think that's a beautiful definition of intelligence. You know, any physical system that that operates under control and constraints will have from within it erupt a force that optimizes these control and constraints in a way that increases future freedom of actions, keeps options open, and actively resists the control and constraints that gave rise to it. Now, to me, this is a very similar process to what mathematical understanding is doing. What understanding does in mathematics itself is it takes the previous control and constraint, in that case rules, axioms, checkable statements, and it does what? It goes beyond them and increases the utility of those things in and of themselves. So the physical universe itself is preconditioned to start with control and constraints, and then from these control and constraints erupts an entropic force of intelligence that, again, increases future freedom of actions, expanding utility. It keeps options open, and actively resists the control and constraints that rise up to it. So I would say that's a great definition of intelligence, and I think we can clearly understand and see how it is related to mathematical understanding. So what we're going to go into now is looking at biological awareness or biological empathy. And we're going to look at how the process of biology, universal entropy, when it meets biology, creates what evolution is actually doing, which is a type of imperfection and fault tolerance that in that acceptance creates, again, an expanded utility. But this is kind of even in a more unique way. So without further ado, we'll go on to the clip of what I consider to be biological awareness in its purest form.
Kind of friend of mine, I consider it a friend really. Here's a Eupholus weevil. And these guys are wonderful. And there's a huge diversity in the appearance. Some of them look like, I don't know what the appropriate word to use is, especially online, like bird poo. I've got 4 young children, and poo is a very common word we use all the time in the house. So yeah, so some of these patterns arise because either they're very attractive, and they're conspicuous signalers, or they've got black background and some white patches here or there, some sort of yellowy browny patches here or there, to mimic bird droppings, so that they're not predated upon or preyed upon. So this is a wonderful species because of the 2 different types of color that we see. The black region, stripes, actually is interesting for another purpose. People, it's very fashionable and very useful to wear a black suit or a black dress. How do we get good black? How do we get good white? Those are questions that the biological systems can actually provide some help with. But here we've got 2 different colors. The scales from this region, these are about 30 microns in diameter, so they're relatively small. And it's the structure within these 2 different sorts of scales which generates the color, the interaction with light. So in these sorts of scales, from that greeny blue region, we see wonderful 3-dimensionally ordered crystals. Photonic crystals. I don't mean atomic or semiconductor crystals, but photonic crystals. The length scale of this periodicity here is about 200 or 300 nanometers. Great. So that's a kind of that color, and we think, what's the bug doing to get this color? Surely it's just changing the lattice constant a little bit. Turns out that's not the case. When we look at the scales from this region, we see something entirely, well, it's not entirely different, it's related, but structurally, geometrically, it's very different. Suddenly, instead of a high degree of order, we see a high degree of what you might expect to be disorder. Clearly, it's not disordered because we still get a strong color reflection. If it was disordered, we'd scatter simultaneously all wavelengths. This is sufficiently ordered. Somewhere on the sliding scale between highly ordered photonic systems and highly disordered photonic systems, somewhere along that sliding scale sits this structure and this color generation. Now, a big question was, what's the cost and what's the benefit? Well, clearly, that should give a purer color, and that, as I've intimated, should give a much sort of broader color. We have a facility in Exeter to measure the BRDF, the bidirectional reflection distribution function. If I have a sample here on the table and I shine light straight down onto it, depending on the nature of the sample, I will get light scatter into the hemisphere above this. If I could pick that hemisphere up and flatten it, it would look like a circle, and at the edge of the circle would be the horizon. So there it is. The reflection from that scale, there's the horizon, there's a 60-degree line, there's a 30-degree line, and that's a 5-degree line. The highly periodic structure gives pure color, and it gives a narrow reflection angle. That might be a benefit. It might be a cost if you want broad visibility. But this relatively disordered system, the color purity it produces is much reduced, but then the scattered angle is increased. So it's a trade-off. It's a balance. And by looking at some of these systems, we can start to get a feel for the cost and the benefit of moving from ordered photonic systems, colored systems, towards disordered systems. We wanted to understand what generated such brilliant color in this, and perhaps slightly less brilliant color in its cousin species, Lepidiota. And the scales are tremendously wide, reminding me of when I used to go, before kids, skiing in France. The roof tiles of these French French houses were just like this, in my early memory. So let's take one of these scales and damage it and have a look underneath and just see what we see. Inside the scale, we see a scattering structure that is truly disordered. And the disorder of these interconnected filamentary networks, that scatters all wavelengths across visible, near UV, near infrared, very efficiently. The polydispersity and the anisotropy of these scattering centers is remarkably efficient. And the efficiency specifically lies in the filling fraction. How packed are these scattering centers? Well, they're not very packed. There's a lot of air. The light gray in here is air, and that is responsible for the bright whiteness, the brilliant whiteness that we see. So that pretty much leads me to the end, and I think I'm bang on 30 minutes. I've got a couple of short summary slides, the first one of which, I've got a lovely video in the background that I'd like to try to start. There it is. So what message should we take home from this? I'd like to draw up a set of rules that we might refer to with respect to smart clothing in biological systems. Any type of color appearance that we can perceive is usually already evolved and has been presented to us in these biological systems. It encompasses order, quasi-order, and disorder along some sort of curious sliding scale of that structure. The fact that these biological materials can just grow is remarkable and is something that we must surely aspire towards. The take-home message from today that I often try to, at the end of a day at home, get home from work and we do bath time and reading time and dinner time and I tuck the kids in. What did you enjoy today? What did you learn today is often what I try to bring home. Well, the key message today, the tuck-in message, if you will, is that these biological systems tolerate imperfection with respect to the mechanisms generating their appearance. And that fault tolerance is a remarkable quality that surely we must try to chase. Finally, lots of...
Okay, so this is amazing. Biology itself has the capacity to take what is initially limited, faulty, imperfect mediums and that are available in abundance, and by virtue of accepting its limitations and its imperfections, there is a force that erupts from within it that takes the medium and organizes it in highly disordered, quasi-ordered, and highly ordered states in order to do what? To increase its utility, right? To increase its future freedom of actions, and by virtue of doing this, actively resist the initial faults and limitations of the grown medium in and of itself initially. So we can see how this is directly related to physical intelligence and how this is also directly related to mathematical understanding. So biology, again, starts with these limitations, right? And by being aware that it has a certain limitation and fault and accepting it as it is, an internal force erupts from within it. Like this internal force I consider universal entropy. What universal entropy is actually doing is expanding the utility of reality itself. And it does this via mathematical understanding, and physical intelligence, and biological awareness or biological empathy. I use those words kind of interchangeably. Biological awareness is kind of like the term in a general sense. Biological empathy is a more refined term that when we're talking about human utility comes to, it seems to be more adequate, more useful to say empathy. But it's a certain awareness. It's awareness of the fault and imperfection and the acceptance of it as is. And when you have acceptance of what's in front of you, you're able to do what? Increase understanding and do what? Increase intelligence. Do what? Increase biological utility, simply by accepting what's in front of you and letting the internal force erupt from within you. That happens when you hold this awareness of what's in front of you. So when you hold up awareness for what's in front of you, you naturally overcome it and expand upon its utility in a way that has never been done in the universe before. Okay, so this is kind of the groundwork for what a thesis to please Jesus is. It's the idea that the human being is invaluable, and that the universe itself is selecting for the advancement of consciousness, and that consciousness has to do with understanding, intelligence, and awareness, and that these things, although they are beyond calculation, they are actually you can measure them in the sense that you can see that there's a change that happens when there's an increase in understanding, an increase in intelligence, and an increase in awareness. And these increases being looked at in ways that expand utility and actively resist limitations, rules, controls, and constraints that were previously existing. So there's a primordial state of control, constraint, limitation, but there's also a universal entropic force that erupts from the inside of all physical systems, all biological systems, all mathematical structures that expands the utility in a way that sheds light on the truth and the actuality of what's in front of you in a way that helps you overcome it, and enhancing the utility, enhancing the intelligence of it, and increasing your understanding of it. This is what human beings do. This is what the universe does. And this is the basis for this thesis, is that each person is conscious, and that this conscious utility means something, and that the universe wants you to use this force that can erupt within you when you have a certain type of awareness, when you have a certain type of intelligence, when you have a certain type of understanding. So this is the thank you so much for visiting with me and going through these ideas. This is part one of a thesis to please Jesus in the digital form. In part two, I'm going to focus a lot on human connection and human utility, and kind of look at the day-to-day life of living a conscious, aware, intelligent, understanding life. So I thank you so much for being with me. This was some good time. Hopefully you passed a good time like I passed a good time, and that next video should be coming soon. Paix soit avec toi. Au revoir.